morning, everyone. My name is Muskaan Khemani, and I'm going to be delivering the final briefing on behalf of my group, advised by Professor Rosen. Today, I'm going to be talking about the problem. I'm going to give a brief overview of the bill. We're going to dive deep into the proposed solution, and with some metrics of success, and then I'll summarize everything that I went over today. Oh no, the formatting is messed up. Okay, what's the problem? We know that the planet's warming. Since the 1800s, the planet has warmed by about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And this trend is reflected in New York State. New York State has warmed by about the same amount, 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And projections say that temperatures are only gonna get higher. Projections range between 5 and 9 degrees Fahrenheit. So at the beginning of the 1900s, New York State's average maximum summertime temperatures were 71 degrees Fahrenheit. Currently, they're at 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Projections say that the average maximum summertime temperatures could go up to 81 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a map of New York State, and this map shows heat index across the state. So the areas that are in red are hotter areas. The areas that are in red actually correspond to urban areas, signifying that New York State's urban areas are hotter. This is a trend that we see across the world. It's called the urban heat island effect, and urban areas tend to be hotter than non-urban areas because of the built environment. This is a photo of a street in New York City, and it's a thermal image. So the blue areas are cooler areas, the red areas are hotter areas. As you can see, there's a slab at the bottom of the photo that's completely red. That's the road. The buildings are red. They tend to be built out of concrete, asphalt, metal. These are very high heat retaining materials, and so they increase temperatures in urban areas. On the other hand, you can see vegetation. That tree in the left side of the photo that's blue is much cooler. That's because trees and vegetation have natural cooling mechanisms like evapotranspiration that cool its surrounding environment. So this translates to a huge temperature difference. Trees' temperatures can be around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Built environments can range upwards of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And this has real impacts on people. On a really hot day, like the several all of us experienced this past summer, people suffer, and heat is only getting worse, so people are suffering more. This is a photo of a lady waiting for a bus stop in New York City. She's clearly under no shade. She's standing in front of a road. She's standing behind of a building. She's surrounded by the built environment. And all of these factors make her temperature a lot hotter. So on a day where the air temperature is, let's say, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature that she's actually feeling, her mean radiant temperature, can be around 132 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a really, really large difference. Our infrastructure is also not built for rising temperatures. This is a heat alert for a playground slide that can reach upwards of 150 degrees Fahrenheit, which is grounds for second and third degree burn. People also stay indoors when it's very hot. Public space usage drops by 13%, transit usage drops by 50%. This has economic impacts because reduced dwell time and foot traffic decrease economic activity. So our bill proposes SHADE as a solution. It's called the Safe Havens for All-Day Enjoyment, or SHADE Act for short. And it proposes shade infrastructure as a cooling solution and adaptation strategy to reduce the strain that rising temperatures place on urban residents and their environments. It's a competitive grant program administered by the Empire State Development Corporation, which is the state's premier economic development agency. And it supports municipalities in New York State with enhancing their outdoor public gathering spaces and transportation areas. So this bill can impact anywhere between 6 million and 17 million people in the state. Grant recipients will be selected based on the demonstration of mean radiant temperature reduction and the number of people served. And as I said, the bill proposes shade infrastructure as a cooling solution. Shade has proven to reduce temperatures. It can cool areas by 10 to 19 degrees Fahrenheit. It also reduces nighttime temperatures by 3 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. This reduces the stress that someone feels when they're outside on a hot day, and it improves their outdoor comfort. And it also reduces health-related impacts related to heat, like emergency room visits and other impacts. Shade also drives economic vitality. It increases pedestrian presence and dwell time. It makes high traffic areas more usable and comfortable during extreme heat. It boosts local retail, dining, and social activity because people are outside for longer. And it lowers cooling demand and eases pressure on the power grid. So what can shade look like? The photo at the back of the slide is actually from a street in Malaga. It's a crocheted canopy. And a crochet teacher and 12 of her students made this. As you might be able to see, the street is pretty narrow, and so maybe tree planting is not the ideal solution, and tree canopy isn't the solution. But a canopy like this could be a solution. Our bill encourages creative and tailor-made solutions for shade, and it can look a lot of different ways, so I'll provide some examples now. I hope you all recognize this photo. This is from our field trip last week. This is a metal roof canopy structure at the Shirley Chisholm State Park that provides shade in a public park in New York City. Structures like these can reduce temperatures between 3 and 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Shade can also look like this. These are 2 photos from Arizona State University, which is actually where this bill was inspired from. And the image on your left is a light reflecting canopy. The image on your right is a solar canopy, which is generating energy as it's providing shade to people. And structures like these, canopies like these, can reduce temperatures between 8 and 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Shade can also integrate vegetation into its infrastructure. So the image on your left is a public bus stop in Houston. And it has a canopy atop the public bus stop, but it also has 2 trees covering it on either side, which provide additional cooling benefits because of evapotranspiration. The image on your right is a bus stop in Melbourne that has a living roof on top of it. So again, provides additional cooling benefits. And temperatures can reduce between 12 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So what are metrics of success for this bill? There are 2 primary success metrics this bill identifies. The first is mean radiant temperature reduction, and the second is number of people served. There's 6 KPIs that we've identified relating to these that can measure success throughout the project's duration. The first is decrease of temperature. The second is increased use of public spaces. The third is driving local economic activity, maximizing the cost effectiveness of projects, improving public health outcomes, and finally, reducing strain on infrastructure that heat puts. So I want to take a second and call you all back to that image I shared of the lady standing underneath absolutely nothing, experiencing incredibly hot temperatures. Imagine if she was standing under something like this or this. Her temperature that she feels could reduce by up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, from 132 degrees Fahrenheit to 112 degrees Fahrenheit. That has real benefits on someone's health, on infrastructure, on economic activity. And so to summarize, extreme heat is a really big problem in New York State. It has impacts on public health, economic activity, infrastructure. The SHADE Act proposes shade infrastructure as a solution to tackle this problem. And shade infrastructure has proven benefits for public health and economic vitality. Thank you. This is my awesome team. I'll take any questions now.
Thank you very much. So I'm kind of curious about the measurement of success. So about the increased use of public space. So I wonder, like, what do you measure under this criteria, under this indicator?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we would measure the amount of people gathering in that space. So that could be foot traffic measurements. It could also be people entering businesses around that area. So there's a lot of different metrics that can give us a proxy of how much more a space is being used.
Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to borrow Noam's question, which is, what is objection to these initiatives? And what we've learned in ecology is that trees themselves, they also have a cooling effect, which, I mean, some of the metal installments wouldn't have. Could you give an insight into what objections there might be and why trees might face even more?
Yeah, so I think that's a two-part question. So the first part of your question is objections. This bill is just proposed, and it's one of the only bills that specifically targets shade infrastructure. There's a lot of other initiatives in New York State that target heat as a problem because it is a large problem, but this bill specifically targets shade infrastructure and economic vitality provided by it. So there are some limitations that come with it. While it can encourage municipalities to be really creative with their solutions, like canopies and other things that are not just vegetation, from our interviews with experts in the field, we have noted that natural cooling is one of the most effective solutions to heat. So there are limitations that this bill has, but this bill is specifically trying to target the impacts that heat has on outdoor enjoyment, hence the name of the bill. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for a great presentation. One question I had was, do you have any metrics to compare the, a lot of the projects you showed are transportation infrastructure, bus stops, I think are the most obvious thing that I think of with this shade infrastructure. Do you have ways of comparing how, city street shade will impact populations versus a bus stop versus things that impact different sectors of the economy?
That's a great question. So the ranges that I shared with you on the temperature reductions are based on research that we did, and they're actually more conservative estimates on how much shade can cool areas. So there's a lot of different case studies around the world that talk about specific shade infrastructure. We've just tried to compile it into a range that makes sense. So absolutely, there would be specific impacts on street versus bus stop, et cetera. But our ranges are more broad, let's say. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I have a few concluding thoughts. First, I want to congratulate the entire class for 5 excellent presentations. These were really well produced. They were clear, they were crisp, they were easy to follow. As my group knows, the test for a briefing is if I understand it. And I understood all of these, so congratulations. What were we doing here this semester? What we're doing here this semester was trying to learn how to produce science-informed public policy. And this is something that in a complicated world, highly technological, lots of impacts on people and the planet, understanding the basic science is something that we all have to strive to do, even those of us who are not trained scientists. And those of you who are trained scientists, communicating that science to non-scientists is critical. And when it's done poorly, it has a bad impact. I would argue that climate change has been some of the worst communicated science in the history of science communication, largely because the scientists didn't understand the policy impact of what they were saying, and they were saying it, unfortunately, a generation before the impacts came in, which is hard to do. I won't go into detail on my views on that, but the point here is that we're starting our look at these policy problems by focusing on the science. Next semester, we're going to be focusing on how do you put these bills into place. Now, we will spend a week saying, okay, let's step out of the simulation and say, what would it take to get these bills passed? In the case of the bill my group's working on, I think they would argue you need to revise the bill because it's not a particularly good bill. Okay, so we'll do that, and we'll do those analyses. But then we're going to go right back into saying, oh, this is the bill we got, and this is what we got to work with, which is the way the real world works. You don't get the bill you want, you get the bill you get, and then you've got to make it happen. And we're going to spend the semester thinking about how do we get this started, because you don't implement a program all at once. It takes a while. First, you got to get people to work on it. You got to hire people. You got to hire contractors. You got to find a place to work. All these things have to happen. And these technical details of administration are what public policy schools largely don't talk about. They talk about, the solution to this is a carbon tax. Okay. So how do you get that passed through Congress? Oh, you can't. Or the solution is to have Obamacare, and we'll access it through a website, except the website crashes because we don't know how to run a website that gets hit as many times as the Obamacare site got hit in its first week. Amazon knows how to do it because they do it over Christmas. We didn't know how to do it. So those details legitimize and make public policy work. The other thing you may have noticed is that we did nothing in the federal government. I mean, it's obvious we did nothing for the federal government. Why? Because right now, the federal government seems to be getting out of the environmental protection business. Okay. But that doesn't mean that the world is getting out of the environmental protection business, or New York State or New York City or any states or cities can afford to do that. Why? Because these are not ideological concerns. These are objective conditions. We just learned the heat in New York City is getting hotter, right? This is not a feeling I have. This is not a belief I have. This is empirical reality. We've been dealing with smoke from fires in Canada, which are made worse by climate change. No question about it. We're breathing it. These are facts. And so you can have ideological opposition to thinking about facts, but in the end, you still got to breathe. And the thing about the environmental problem is it's always been a set of objective conditions. And so what's happening now, a lot of the activity is moving to states and cities. Those of you who aren't from the United States, one of the factors about the structure of the United States government is it's a federal system. And what that means is that states have sovereignty. They can actually pass laws and impose taxes. And in many parts of the world, you have a highly centralized government. Only the central government does that. The provinces and the cities do not have the authority that states have in the United States. Now, it doesn't mean that the federal government in the United States isn't trying to put itself in the middle of some of those policies, but the structure of government here does provide for state sovereignty. And that's why we're focusing on New York. This is the first time since the program began in 2002 that we've only focused on local issues. I'm hopeful that in a few years we'll be able to mix local and national for this class. But the basic structure of these 2 semesters remains the same. We focus on environmental science in the summer, learn the full dimensions of the problem, and then communicate it. And that goes into our thinking next semester, because next semester, we're going to get amnesia about the science. We're going to be focusing on politics and management and policy and economics. And what I want you to do throughout the fall is keep coming back to these scientific issues. Because what makes this class unique is this is the most science-informed policy analysis you're going to see in pretty much any American university, because we've insisted on that for over 2 decades. And that's what we're going to be doing next semester. We will be working on management and policy, but we're not going to get science out of our minds. We're going to keep science as part of how we think about these policy problems. Now, I thought the groups today uniformly did an excellent job of communicating science to non-scientists. And, you know, we might take it a little bit for granted, but I guarantee you this is not a typical kind of thing. You don't see this in a lot of places. And you see it here because we're focused on it, because it's absolutely critical if we're concerned about solving environmental problems. So congratulations on a great job. And you were so efficient, you have a half hour off. So have a good summer.